Hello, everybody. Welcome to Wisdom from North, another conversation. My name is Jannike, and I'm today in Stavanger at a near-death conference at Sola Helsefarm. And I have seen so many wonderful presenters, and among them, I have PMH Atwater at my side. She is a magnificent woman, a brilliant, smart, very powerful woman who has done a lot of research within the field of near-death studies. She has written 10 books about the subject, and she has interviewed more than 3,000 people, both adults and children, about their experiences. And she's had even 3 near-death experiences herself in 1977. And PMH, thank you so much for accepting to do this interview. You just had a speech up there, and you're probably really tired. So thank you for being a great sport.
Oh, well, we do our best.
Okay, so I would love to hear about your experience. You died 3 times in 1977, and you heard, we spoke about this, you heard a voice telling you what to do with your life, basically.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, my first near-death experience was very short. That was January the 2nd, 1977. I was living then in Boise, Idaho. Idaho is a western state in the United States. And I was living in Boise, the capital city. And I had a miscarriage and extreme hemorrhaging. And that was the cause of that. And it was primarily an out-of-body experience, but it was very detailed and very in-depth. And then 2 days later, January 4, 1977, I had a major thrombosis or blood clot that dislodged in the right thigh vein. And that was followed by the worst case of phlebitis the specialist had ever heard of or seen. It's like this part of my leg was all on fire. It was bright red and scarlet color and burning, just awful. And that was the cause of death number 2. Death number 3 was March 29, so that's like 3 months later. And to this day, we don't know for sure what killed me. It might have been a heart attack. We don't know. Maybe a stroke. Nobody knows for sure. But I had no vital signs. My first one, as I said, primarily a detailed out-of-body experience. My second and third were much longer, and it would take a long time to talk about them. And we don't have that kind of time, and there's not that kind of time on your show. So let me just simply say that on the second one, also had an out-of-body experience, then moved into another realm, another world, where I was met by loved ones who had died and gone on before me, including a grandfather I'd never seen, never heard, never even seen photographs of him, had no idea what he looked like or what he was like, because I was not part of that family. So that was brand new. He came and introduced himself to me, so that was a real thrill for me. Spent a lot of time with Jesus, very happy time with Jesus, a lot of laughter, a lot of love, and then also had a life review. In my case, it was not just seeing pictures going by of different episodes in your life or the whole life, but for me it was a reliving of the life from birth until my death. Every thought I had ever thought, every word I had ever said, everything I had ever done, plus the effect of all of that on anybody who ever came within my environment, whether I met them or not, even just passersby on the street, plus the effect of that on the soil, on the air, on the water, the plants, the animals. So I got the total gestalt, the total reality of my existing on the earth plane, what it was like for all realms of life, for me being here. And that, you know, I had grown up, I'm sure as all of you have, where you learn what things to do, what things not to do, what things to say, what things not to say. But nobody ever told me that every feeling you had, every thought you thought went out and had a life of its own. I never heard of that. So that to me was very hellish, in that I got to see what happened because of my thoughts and feelings. And I was very ashamed of that. So I went through a period of forgiveness, forgiving myself, forgiving others. And that period of forgiveness was so deep and so rich and so beautiful that I floated back into my body and was able to reactivate the body. The third experience, I don't know what it's like for you out there, but when you've gone through a major trauma, it's really hard to come back. Most near-death experiences, we forget this, most near-death experiences come from violence or trauma. So you have a body to rebuild. And I was having a hard time rebuilding my body. It would not respond. And a lot of therapy, a lot of work, and my body still was not responding. And I went through a very, very deep time and a very desperate time. And it was during that time frame that I had the third near-death experience. And that also had an out-of-body component. Floated out through the house, into the sky. It was at night, the night sky, and into a place or a realm or a dimension. To me, it was like a lip of light. It's like a split in the heavens or in the universe, and it was all light, and I went in there, and this light-filled world, and had various experiences there. Among them, I was able to witness creation as it occurred. So I saw how creation happens and is still happening, how consciousness is creation itself, what the relationship is between creation and consciousness. And I was able to see that and how it works. And it was when I was there in that space, seeing it happen, hearing it happen, watching it happen, that a voice spoke. I was familiar with guides and guardians and angels. I knew those kind of voices. I'd been a meditator before my experience, before I died. I was very familiar with other planes of consciousness. But I'd never heard a voice like this. This voice was so big and so powerful. How do you name a voice like that? You can't. It was bigger than the universe. That voice filled all of the universe. And that voice said to me, and I quote, "Test revelation. You are to do the research. One book for each death." Books 2 and 3 were named, not book 1. I was shown what was to be in each book, but not how to get the information or how to put it together. And I came back knowing this was my job, this was my mission, this was for me to do. No questions. I didn't question that voice. And that voice gave me the power then to do the work. It took about a year before I was reasonably human again, because I had to relearn how to crawl, how to stand, how to climb stairs, how to walk, how to run, tell the difference between left and right, see properly, hear properly, and rebuild all of my belief systems. So it took a while to do all of that, a good full year. And then I immigrated, that's what we call it in Idaho. I immigrated from Idaho to the state of Virginia and Washington, D.C. You need to know a little bit about Idahoans or Westerners, you know, Idaho, the land of real cowboys, real Indians, real canyons. They were very robust, individualistic kind of people. And the idea of moving to the state of Virginia, which is in the eastern part of the United States, for me was like moving to Greece or maybe China or another country. That the eastern part of the United States is really not part of the United States, that we didn't claim them, we didn't own up to them, we didn't want anything to do with Easterners. A good Westerner, don't want anything to do with Easterners. So I moved east. And my family to this day has still not forgiven me for leaving the West, my family of origin. They still have not forgiven me because, you know, a good Westerner can move further west, but you can't go east. So came east and spent a little time in Chicago. I had an aunt and uncle there. And went to the Chicago airport, O'Hare Airport, and that's where I met Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Her plane was late, about an hour late going to Europe. So she had some time, I had some time. So we sat down together on a bench, just the two of us, visiting like little schoolgirls. And I told her about my 3 near-death experiences, what had happened to me. And she validated my experience, which I think is very important for someone to validate your experience and say it was real. So she did that to me. She said, she told me about the near-death experience. I'd never heard of it before. She called me a near-death survivor, not an experiencer, a survivor. And I truly felt like I had survived death. So I felt that that was an honest statement. But talking to her, it's like it gave me more questions than it gave me answers. So it was after being with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross that I began my own work, doing what I was told to do. And that has took 33 years. My research base is now nearly 4,000 adult and child experiencers. I use a different protocol. Bear in mind that the first 3 to 4 years of my work, I'd never heard of Raymond Moody, never heard of Life After Life. My work was my work. Never heard of these other people, was not influenced at all by Raymond Moody. I was trained by a police officer father. My dad was a cop, and I spent a lot of my childhood years in a police station, not as a criminal, but as waiting on my dad in the police station. And Dad started teaching me police investigative techniques at the age of 9. I was only 9 years old. He did this off and on for 3 years. And that's what I did. I followed his advice. Dad said, you never, never, never use a questionnaire. None of that kind of stuff. You never use words in advance of the individual. Let's say there's an automobile accident and there are 4 witnesses. You never use words in advance of the individual. So all you can do is go up and say, did you see anything? And if they use the word car, then you can use the word car. If they say accident, then you can say accident. You can never use words in advance of the individual. You say things like, well, would you explain that to me? Or tell me more? Or, would you explain that a little bit more? I'm not sure I heard that. Would you go into a little more detail? Never using words in advance. Excuse me. And Dad always said, the body says more than the mouth does. So you're studying the body. What are they doing with their shoulders and their arms, the eyes? What's going on with the eyes and the head, the hips, the legs, the feet? So I'm studying the people, and then as often as I could, I would get into the home, and I would have sessions with the spouse, with the children, with the neighbors, maybe with the healthcare provider, maybe with the boss at work. Finding out, well, is your loved one or your employee any different now? If they're different, why are they different? How are they different? So I was always going for that larger story, not just from the near-death experiencer, but from their home, their family, their neighbors, and different kinds of people in different parts of the country.
Can I just ask you, where did you find all these cases, all these people?
I swear I must have had an invisible sign on my back that said, "Tell me your story." It was all synchronicity. Well, most of it was. Read my book, Near-Death Experiences. The rest of the story came out last year. It's my summary piece, and I give you all the stats, all the facts in there of how I discovered these people. And I kid you not, I was working a job then that required a lot of travel and go to construction sites. So I would be in a given town, let's say it's Washington, D.C. I would be in a taxi cab, and this really happened. My taxi cab driver was from the islands, I believe. He was as black as a black color crayon. He was not brown. He was really black. That is to say, the color of his skin. And he took one look at me. It got very excited. Very excited. He kept looking into my eyes and got very excited. And then he said, "You've died too. Now I can tell you my story because I know you'll understand." Or I was in Macon, Georgia, in the deep South, and I was at a truck stop, and I was all by myself, and I was simply reading from a paperback book, all by myself at this little table, and this great big man came up. I mean, huge, very tall, very wide, big fellow. And he comes up to me and he says, "Can I sit down at your table with you?" And I thought to myself, well, okay, sit down at my table with me. And right away, he started telling me all about his near-death experience. I had not introduced myself. I hadn't said anything except, okay, it's okay. And I was reading a typical paperback. It wasn't near death. It was a typical paperback. Kind of like a fiction or something. And he told me all about his near-death experience. It didn't matter where I was. I could be in an elevator. And people would come up to me and say, "I'd really like to tell you about my near-death experience."
That's amazing.
"I'd really like to tell you about the time I died." I was in a taxi cab in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and my driver was from Egypt. Okay? And he was driving me to the job site. And he said, "I would like to tell you about the time I died back in Egypt. Would you like to hear my story? Oh, okay, yes. So he told me all about his near-death experience. You know, the first television shows I was on, Sally Jessy Raphael was one of the first. My limousine driver had had a near-death experience. The taxi cab driver's brother had had a near-death experience. The guy who was doing the pre-interview show, you know, before you get on stage, his mother had had a near-death experience. When I left, another taxi cab driver, he had had a near-death experience. It just didn't matter where I went or what I did. You can call it synchronicity.
Or magic.
You can call it magic. I don't know what you want to call it, but that's the living truth. Whenever I would turn around, there'd be another one.
That's wonderful. You were probably really meant to do this work.
I guess so.
So what are the common pattern that you saw out of all these experiences?
Well, certainly the pattern of the near-death experience is global. But I found different types within the pattern. And bear in mind, I didn't know anybody else was doing this work. And I found 4 distinctive pattern or types of a near-death experience. The first one I call the initial, and it's something like the person is greeted by the living dark or the friendly nothingness, or they have a quick out-of-body experience, or maybe there's a greeter there, or they hear this special voice. And that's all that happens is one of those, or maybe 2 of those, or maybe 3 max. That's all. Just hardly anything. And yet it's intense enough that they begin to manifest the full pattern of physiological and psychological after effects afterward. It can change them lifelong. The other pattern is the unpleasant or hell-like experience. Yes, people experience hell just as well as heaven. Some of them describe hell as being a big storm, or they're lost in a void. There's nobody there. Maybe they're in a whirlpool. Maybe they're in a dungeon and they're being tortured. Lots of different stories, spinning vortexes, all kinds of darkness or abandonment. And there's a lot of life reviews with these hellish experiences, or at least frightening experiences. The third one is the more pleasant or heaven-like experience, and these 2 can have, often have the life review with them. And you all know about this one, because most of your books, most of your movies, most of your TV shows, most of your articles are about the more pleasant or heavenly experience when, for a fact, not quite half the people have them. And then there's the transcendent experience. Very seldom is this ever personal. You almost never hear of a life review in one of these. And these seem to focus on history, the history of the human being, the history of the universe. They have to do with government. They have to do with systems, whatever can be done to right or to balance out whole cultures, maybe invent things. You get a lot of inventors that come from transcendent experiences, or people that come back with this knowledge of the universe. Certainly you can get that in other types, but you seem to get more of that with the transcendent experience. These people are just as apt to hop a light ray and tour the universe as they are to wind up in some kind of heavenly college taking classes. So this is that big, expansive kind of experience. So those are the four main types that I found. I found for elements within the pattern, the one most people have is the out-of-body experience. No, it's not like a typical out-of-body experience. So forget all of these scientists that are having special experiments in their labs because they are not duplicating the near-death type of out-of-body experience. It's much more detailed, much more intense, much deeper. And the second one that a lot of people have is the light. This incredible light, adults say it is brighter than 10,000 suns. Very, very bright. It's a light that knows your name. It knows all about you. It's a light that you can converse with. The next one is a greeter of some kind. Usually it's a loved one who's died and gone on before you. Sometimes it's a religious figure. Sometimes it's a light being. Sometimes it's an angel. Sometimes it's an animal. There's lots of animals in near-death experiences. A pet that has died and gone on before. Children have a lot of birds that they're greeted by, maybe turtles or bunnies, cats, dogs. Adults are greeted certainly by pets that have died and gone on before, or maybe it's horses, maybe it's lions. I don't know why we get a lot of lions, but we do.
They're very powerful.
It is usually the bigger animals for the bigger people and the little animals for the little people, and I find that interesting. It's like an accommodation. It's like whatever will make you more comfortable or put you at ease.
But that's very nice to know.
That's what you get. That's what you get. And believe it or not, the tunnel is not a signature feature of the near-death experience. Most of these skeptics are coming up with all of these ideas about what happens in the brain, about tunnels, when most of the experiences don't have tunnels. You know, that big Gallup poll study that was done in, when was it? 1982, I believe. Only 9% of the people reported a tunnel. We didn't get a lot of tunnel reports until after the media had sensationalized Raymond Moody's book, Life After Life. And when that book was sensationalized, then we started hearing lots of tunnel reports. I don't think experiencers are lying or making their experience fit what most researchers find in the field. Rather, I think it's because you just don't know words. You don't know what to call anything. You don't have, it's ineffable. You just don't have words. So if there's any kind of darkness, you would call it a tunnel. Maybe it wasn't a tunnel. In most of the countries in the world, they don't report tunnels at all in their near-death experiences. They've never heard of things like a tunnel. Maybe there's a cave reported, but, or children, you know, they're going through a noodle, the idea of a tunnel, but that's seldom. It doesn't happen that often. In my research base, less than a third had tunnels. So when we're looking at skeptics, I'm saying, what's this stuff about tunnels? You know, don't give me all of this stuff about the eyes and the brain and how it can form tunnels. Forget about that. Most people don't have them. So I have a little fuss with a lot of the skeptics. I honor them. You know, it's good that they're doing what they're doing. They invite us to work harder and do more. That's good. That's always good. But I want them to stay on track. And one of the things I've found with skeptics is none of them that I know of have ever done an independent study of any appreciable number of near-death experiencers and their various types of experiences that they talk about. None of them that I know of have ever done any type of real study of the physiological and psychological after effects and the experience this has lifelong and how it changes people. So if you're looking at the various skeptics, I'm looking at their studies. I'm looking at their protocol. I'm looking at what they did, and I'm saying they come up short, very short. I don't know what they're doing, but as far as I'm concerned, it's very superficial to the real thing.
And we just had a doctor, right, that studied at
Yes,
Harvard.
Dr. Eben Alexander. If you haven't heard about Eben yet, you will. Dr. Eben Alexander is a neurosurgeon, brain specialist, Harvard, wonderful credentials. Did not believe in near-death studies, wouldn't even read the data, wouldn't even read the papers at all. And then he had one just a few years ago. It was spontaneous E. coli bacterial meningitis. He made medical history. This has never happened before with an adult who survived. He made medical history. No cortex at all. All of the parts of his brain that makes a person human was all gone. They did a spinal tap, and it was all pus. His spine was filled with pus. His brain was marinating in pus. Nothing. The odds were 10%. He was this way for 7 days. And he got worse and worse and worse. Finally, they gave him 1%, and he came back. Within a few weeks or a few months, I forget how long, he got his memories back. He got his training back. He got the science back. He didn't lose any of it. It all came back. Now, those skeptics, and there's a lot of them, that are responding to the story that was in Newsweek magazine, cover story, or cover on the cover of the book, inside the story about Eben Alexander, and are angry about him and are skeptical about him and his story. If they're responding just to what was in Newsweek magazine, they do not have the whole story. If they read his book, Proof of Heaven, it just came out just a couple of weeks ago. I got one of the first copies. If they read his book, all of it, then they will sing a different tune. His story is bulletproof. His story will change the world. For all of you skeptics, look at his entire story, and then you tell me it was a hallucination, or it was imagination, or whatever. Dramatic case has made medical history. Read about Eben Alexander. I know him. I was one of the researchers called in on his case. So I know Eben. His mission, since he's been back, is to show the world the reality of the spiritual world and how important the spiritual world is, and that science and spirituality are twin halves of the same whole. He has the language to do it, he has the science to do it, and he has the personal case to do it.
Do you think we are moving into another time now? According to the calendar, Mayan calendar and everything, that things are speeding up?
Look, folks, in May of this year the announcement was made, they have found the rest of the Mayan calendar. So the Mayan calendar is not ending on December 21, 2012. They found the rest of it. The calendar goes on for millions and billions and trillions of years. Those Mayan astronomer priests were really good. And it's just shocking, the scientific world, the archaeological world, history. I mean, what they're finding now about the Mayan calendar is just mind-blowing. The only thing that ends on December 21, 2012 is the sunstone. That stone on which the carvings, the initial carvings, were made. That ends on December 21, 2012. The calendar does not.
That's good to know.
If you know anything about cycles, if you know anything about astrology, if you know anything about the timing of our times, you know then that a lot of major cycles are peaking now. There's a 300,000 year cycle that's peaking now, a 25,920 year cycle that's peaking now, an 11,600 year cycle that is peaking now, and a lot of the smaller ones, all peaking right now. Now, if you just take the 25,920 year cycle, that cycle changes everything. If we look at that cycle as astrologers, for instance, that's the changing of the cosmic year. A cosmic year lasts 25,920 years. A cosmic month lasts, 1,120 years or something like that. We call those ages, like the age of Aquarius, the age of Pisces, and so forth. So that's a cosmic month. A cosmic year, the 25,920 year cycle, changes everything. Well, all you have to do is read your newspaper. You don't need a psychic. Read your newspaper. Politics is changing. Governments are changing. Leaders are changing. Churches are changing. Religion is changing. Education is changing. And we have now coming in the new children. My book on them comes out in 1 month.
You wrote a book about indigo children as well, right?
Let's take all the titles: indigo, crystal, starseed, psychic, rainbow. Take all of those labels and toss them.
Okay.
Then take all the characteristics those labels supposedly defined and bunch them together, and you've got the new kids. We are evolving as human beings. The quantum leap that has been predicted for eons of time that would happen in the human family is happening now. The name of my book is Children of the Fifth World. It comes out through Bear & Company, Children of the Fifth World. Get that book. I talk about evolution. I talk about the new kids. I talk about changing genetics. the good, the bad, the indifferent, sex, money, drugs, the digital world, education, how they're living now, timelines, the great shifting. I go in depth about what's happening to we the people, the human family now.
Is it more as well moving from the mind to the heart? Because you talked about the heart today, that the heart has a huge intelligence.
Well, it's certainly the idea of consciousness is expanding tremendously. Huge expansions in consciousness that are global. Look at the Arab Spring. Huge expansions of consciousness. So that's what I look at. You can say it's love-based, but I prefer to use spiritual. It's like spiritual-based or somehow that sense of the soul, of the spirit, certainly of love. But the idea that everyone has the right to life, everyone has the right to speak, everyone has the right to be educated, everyone has a right to a reasonable life. You know, you can't jail and kill a woman just because she was raped. That's not her fault. And they do that in many of the Muslim countries. Sorry, it's not her fault. So this awakening in the Muslim countries, women and girls have the right to be educated. They have the right to think. They have the right to jobs. Men too. So we have this revolution, convolution, whatever you want to call it, that is happening globally, that is uplifting humankind. Are we all going to make it? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. But the world is changing. Earth changes as well. On the order of biblical changes are happening now. Your storms, your winds, your tornadoes, all of these kinds of floods that are affecting masses of people, masses of land.
How can we deal with this in the best way? I mean, it's kind of frightening with all these things happening.
How can we deal with this? How can I say, how can we deal with this in just a few words? You'll get a lot
few
of that
tools.
in my book, Children of the Fifth World, and also near-death experiences, the rest of the story.
Yeah, because it's important not to go into your fear.
And meditation is invaluable. Prayer and meditation is invaluable. I know people don't go to churches anymore, but sorry, folks, if you can possibly have some kind of house of worship or some kind of place where you can go, especially take your children. We have a lot of home churches now. People who are maybe the neighborhood forms their own church services in their homes, and they take turns in different people's homes. Where we, the people, are having our own worship in our own home, or maybe a special building or a special place, or maybe outdoors. You really need the group. You need that idea of the group. And our new children coming in are group-minded anyway. They're groupies. So you want the idea of the group to help each other, to serve each other, to uplift each other. So that's very, very helpful. Of course, prayer and meditation is very helpful. To be able, as near as you can, drug-free. And I know people are going to scream and yell and say you're old-fashioned and you don't know what you're talking about. I do know what I'm talking about. Stay away from alcohol as much as you can and drugs as much as you can, because it affects the brain. It affects the brain in very specific ways, especially if you have these before puberty. and it will dull or dumb down the brain. Yes, you can have these incredible experiences. That's true. That's absolutely true. But when these incredible experiences happen, you're in the presence of elders, you're prepared for it, you're in a group, you are protected by the group and the elders and the group energy. And you're able to work through your experience through the help of the elders. You just don't go out in your car and have it for entertainment. And that's where kids are getting in trouble. And, you get drunk and it begins to destroy brain cells. There's been a lot of studies on this. The more you drink, the more brain cells are destroyed or hurt or dumbed down. Television, you don't want any television in the home if you've got little ones. You don't want it on up until the age of 2. Because if you do have the television on like a radio for sound, for background noise, the child won't talk much. So it inhibits their ability to speak, which inhibits the ability to think. No television before the age of 2. After that, the introduction to iPads or iPhones or computers and this kind of thing, slow but sure, very slow but sure up until puberty. One of the things that frightens me are the schools now that are teaching 4-year-olds how to use a computer. Of course they catch on.
But is it dangerous?
But that energy, yes, it has an effect on the nervous system and on the brain. Keep it slow. You don't want it fast. Keep it slow. And if you increase it year by year, more and more exposure, more and more being on these devices, then it's easier for the brain to handle it. And after puberty, you can usually handle it pretty well. But the little ones who are just crazy for these kind of things, it's like a toy. It's like the new candy is these digital devices, electronic devices. It helps them to be able to handle a lot of things at once. It makes them very quick. They can juggle things in their brain better. That's true. They're very quick. They're very fast. They know a lot, but they cannot reason. They're losing language. They're losing the ability to reason. They're losing the ability to recognize emotions from people's faces or voice tones. They're losing that. And that's very serious in society. We need that emotional contact, that emotional exposure. And an iPhone or an iPad keeps you away from that. If you're through with a person, you just send them an email or a text message saying, "I'm through with you, goodbye." They have no way of knowing the effect of that on the individual on the other end. Bullying especially. You have no way of knowing how that affects the individual and the emotions. So, we need to be careful with that and certainly learn an etiquette for it, but recognize the fact that we human beings are emotional beings. And we need that emotional support, or we're not healthy. We're just not healthy. We need it.
We need to accept our feelings, maybe all our feelings.
We need to express our feelings, good, bad, and indifferent. We need to express as human beings. And we're not able to do that in an emotional or tonal way with the digital devices. And it's making a difference. But again, just read the book Children of the New Millennium, or excuse me, Children of the Fifth World. I go in depth about what to do, what not to do, what would be helpful, what to look for with this kind of thing. Children of the Fifth World.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your wisdom. We've been talking for a long time, and you need to get dinner because you need to eat. And is there anything you want to say before we end?
Yes. Of all the experiencers that I've spoken to and been with, most of them, almost all of them, say the same thing after their experience. The number one phrase they say, most of them, is, always there is life. It's the number one thing that most near-death experiencers say after they've been resuscitated or revived. Always there is life. Now think about that. That means there is no afterlife. That means there is no before life. That means there is no now life. That means always there is life. In some form, in some place, we have always lived, and we will always live. That means that life really is eternal.
Thank you so much. And thank you for watching, guys. See you soon. Bye.